I have always said that Wolf Hall is my favourite book. I love the writing, I love the atmosphere, I love the humour, I love the ghosts. But I have only ever read it once. And since this year is my year of rereads, I thought it only fair that I start with the book that I claim is my favourite that I have ever read. And I thought I would bring you along.
Hello. So I have now read the part 1 and part 2 of Wolf Hall. Sorry, I'm doing the annoying holding the tiny mic thing, but you can't really clip it to a turtleneck, so I'm going to have to. I will try not to put it too close to my mouth. I know how annoying that is. At the very beginning, we have Cromwell lying on the ground in his father's yard as his father beats him up in 1500. And so we begin with Cromwell's past, because that's very important to who Cromwell is in this book. And I am going to talk about class in this book, but I think I'll save that for a bit later. 1529, and then we go back in time and we hop about a bit, but most of it is between 1521 and 1529. And we are learning sort of the backstory of Cromwell, his relationship with Thomas Wolsey, who was kind of his patron and brought him into the orbit of Henry VIII. And we are also learning the backstory of why Henry wants a divorce, and a little bit about Anne Boleyn and the machinations in the Tudor court in the 1520s. And there is a sense of downfall, and there's a lot of sort of foreboding, both about Wolsey and in Cromwell's private life. There is moments that warn you of stuff that's going to come that I think that's foreshadowing I missed on first reading. I'm not obsessed with it, the writing or anything, in the way that I remember being, the way I feel about Wolf Hall in my memory. I am enjoying it, and the more I go in, the more I am liking it. I love Cromwell's sassiness, his put downs. He is a master of telling off the nobility, which I really, really love. There's a scene in these early bits with Thomas More, who is kind of his nemesis. Thomas More, obviously super Catholic. Thomas Cromwell, associated with the Reformation. Master Cromwell, he rubs his hands together. I relish you, I do indeed. Now I feel as a nutmeg must do when it's grated. A lesser man, a lesser lawyer would say. I have read Tyndale's work, and I find no fault there, but Cromwell won't be tripped. He casts it back. He asks me rather, have you read Tyndale? It says in Ecclesiastes, he that toucheth pitch shall be defiled, unless his name's Thomas More. It's just the way they talk around each other. It's really enjoyable. But the writing isn't where I'm obsessed. And I think really my obsession began with Bring Up the Bodies, which is the second book in the trilogy. But I am still, as I said, enjoying it. We have had our first He Cromwell, and many more after. We have had our first ghost and our first All Hallows Eve. The ghost of Prince Arthur was the first ghost to appear in the trilogy, and if you know anything about the books, you will know they are, to a greater or lesser extent, ghost stories. The historical fiction is always a ghost story because it is the story of real people from the past, or at least when it contains real people, it is. And so telling a tale of Thomas Cromwell is a ghost story. But again, I will talk about that a bit later when the ghosts have come out to play. The main chapter in these first two sections is called An Occult History of Britain, and it talks about the mythic past of Britain and the mythic past of the Tudors, mixing that in with the the immediate past of the Tudors and of Henry VIII's father, Henry VII, his brother, Prince Arthur, and Prince Arthur's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, which is what precedes this crisis in the church and in the monarchy. Monarchy is the word that I wanted. And so Hilary Mantel is telling us that she is talking about history of Britain, but she is weaving in these mythical beginnings and the mythical past. We are making a fiction, a myth of the real history. And she does so by telling us about the giants that once ruled England, and before the time of the Troy and then the Trojans who came to Britain, supposedly, in the mythical past. And also the mythical past of Henry VIII, because his claim is not good. He is the son of a usurper, and he there is a lot of his stories about his line, about whether he is truly the son of someone related to the royal family, or is the son instead of a serpent, whether maybe his great-great-grandmother was Melusine, a woman who was part serpent, and the idea of a king being drawn in by a woman who is part serpent, who has secrets and takes control of the story, again, is something that is hinting at what we know of Anne Boleyn. Something that I love in fiction is when we have this weaving of folklore into the story, particularly when that sort of folklore and the more mythic beliefs of a place are woven together with religion and fervent religion. And since we have been introduced to Thomas More and his hair shirt already, the fervency of that religion is part of the story, along with the fervency of the men who want to go to see the Pope and tell him why he is wrong and why he should allow them to publish the Bible in English. And so we have all this fervour around belief, and I think that she's doing such an interesting job of playing that against this idea of fiction. What is fictionalized? What is true? And so we are building the myth of Thomas Cromwell, a man around whom there is a myth in English history. I watched Kayla from Books and Lala read this book when she read the top 10 books from the New York Times, top 100 books of the 21st century, and she didn't like it. And she said something about, is it only enjoyed because people like the story of Henry VIII so much? I think this time of history is particularly interesting because of that being a period of tumult, a period of immense social change in England, a rupture from what had gone on before. He is, as I said, the son of a usurper, and he destroys the Catholic Church in England, which is a massive part of Western history. The way the world is now, a lot of it comes from this break. And this break didn't just happen with Henry VIII, obviously it's happening all over Europe in this book before Henry, and Henry himself was always Catholic. But I think moments of rupture and of turning points in history are often of interest to people. But I don't think that's the only thing to love about this book. Like I said, the way that she is playing with the idea of history and myth, and the way she is mythologizing Cromwell, I think she's doing something very interesting there. And as along with several other elements about which I will talk to you when I've got a little further into the book. Hello, so one thing I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about the mythological element of Wolf Hall is that Cromwell himself is kind of a myth. So there are, in the actual historical record, there are missing years, lost years in Cromwell's life. Those between when he was a child in Putney up to when he came to Wolsey's door, Cardinal Wolsey's door. And so a lot of this book, Wolf Hall, of this first book of the trilogy, is filling in that lost years. It is embellished and invented by Mantel, but not only by Mantel, also by Cardinal Wolsey. Cardinal Wolsey tells people stories about Cromwell, and Cromwell himself, not outright tells stories, but leaves hints or suggestions or doesn't answer questions that weave a mythology about his background. Cromwell is not from a big house, a well-known family. He is not noble. And so his background could be anything except that. And it allows him to be mysterious. And it grows the idea of the myth of Cromwell, which is interesting because there is also the myth of Cromwell, historically speaking. The history was written by his enemies, which is something that is also mentioned in the book. He's like, who would write about Cromwell? Which is obviously amusing because you're reading a book about Cromwell, but at the same time, it hints about the fact that a lot of people hated Cromwell. His downfall meant that his history was written by his enemies. And so we have a mythologized idea of who Cromwell is if you study English history. And so there's lots of layers, lots of layering going on, as I mentioned earlier. It is all about storytelling and mythologizing one's past, whether one is king or pauper. So today it is a lovely day. It is the warmest day of the year so far. So we are going for a walk around the grounds of Hatfield House. Hatfield House is the palace where Henry's children grew up at different times. Mary, Elizabeth and Edward were all there. And it is allegedly where Elizabeth found out that Mary was dead and she was now queen. So it has a lot of Tudor history. There is the old palace, which is Tudor, and then the new palace, the bigger one, which is Jacobean, but they are both closed. They're only open in the summer. So we're going for a walk around the grounds, at least. Hello, I am sorry if I'm sorry about the squeaky chair, and I'm sorry if you could hear the washing machine on in the background. It's like the next room to my office where it is. Hopefully this will protect us from some of that. I have finished part 3 of Wolf Hall. I am roughly 45% of the way in now. Many things have happened. I don't think you can really spoil Wolf Hall because it is real. So Thomas Wolsey has died. Thomas Wolsey is Cromwell's protector and his father figure after his father was abusive to him in his childhood. And the loss of Cromwell and the loss of Wolsey, which we have been expecting to happen for the first 44% of this book, we can feel that it is going to happen. There is so much foreboding and foreshadowing that we know it's going to happen, and that it's going to hit Thomas hard when it does, because Cromwell has already experienced a lot of loss. I think those parts which are lesser known historical reality, I won't spoil, but he has experienced a lot of loss and a lot of grief throughout here. It is actually quite sad, a lot of the first part of this. And as I was saying when I got through the first 2 parts that I wasn't hooked, I am now. I'm in, I'm hooked. This third part is where I feel like it really gets going. She has laid the scene for us, she has set it all up, and we are in Cromwell. And Cromwell is, because of the loss he has experienced, becoming the man he is, the figure, the mythological figure that he creates and has created for him. I am enjoying his sharpness now, his wittiness. Mantel's humour is coming out. He says, for example, the Lord Chancellor is here. He thinks in irritation, why can Moore never get a proper shave? Can't he make time, shorten his whipping schedule? And there's a whole scene that is in Thomas More's house where we meet his wife, his daughters, his wards, and his treatment of them, his abuse of them. It's done with a lot of humour. There's no like physical abuse in this scene. It's just like belittling. But we are much more mocking Thomas More in that scene than we are any of the women who are experiencing it. Anyway, it's all done with so much wit, and the way that Henry is both kingly and pathetic, I think is really, really well done. I think the things that you start to notice, because we started off with Cromwell in the mud of Putney, and the mud of Putney is kind of a recurring theme, this his lowly birth, specifically Putney, but also just in general. And as he is getting more into the orbit of the king, he's getting more into the orbit of the nobility, and so his class keeps coming up, his background, which denies him access in a lot of ways, but also allows him things that other people aren't allowed. There are 2 fool characters in this part. As you know, the idea of the medieval fool that's continued on into Tudor times is of someone who can say anything, and they are simple-minded is the way that one of them is described in here, but they are allowed to say anything. And the idea is, how much are they taking that license? How much are they like aware of the license they are taking? And I think in some ways Cromwell is a fool as a character, because he can say things to the king that no one else seems to be able to, and also he is, because of his lower class background, his interactions with the people around him are different than those. He is othered in that way because of his class, particularly Norfolk, Duke of Norfolk, who is Anne Boleyn's uncle, and he is a Howard, and he says, which is like a big famous important family, and he says, substitute nothing, you misbegotten. The Duke stabs a forefinger into his shoulder. You person, he says, and again, you nobody from hell, you horseborn, you cluster of evil, you lawyer. So the things that he insults him for, some of them are being from hell and and a cluster of evil, but also him being a nobody, him being the child of a whore, him being just a lawyer, a lowly nobody. He is a person, and at one point he says, stop being such a person, why are you such a person when you come from such a lowly background? So that personhood, there is a lot of the nobility not seeing servants and people of a lower class background as people. Henry talks about being so alone because none of his lords are around him, but he is surrounded by an entire retinue of servants, and those people are just not seen. And Cromwell's ability to be both seen and heard and also not seen, his ability to slip into spaces, is something that Mantel is playing with here. His seen and unseen presence relates him to the ghosts in some ways, and it is him as an historical figure who is understood and not understood. There is so much liminality in the figure of Cromwell, and I'm really enjoying how she draws that out.
Hello, please excuse the pyjamas. It is fairly early today, maybe not early enough that I should still be in my pyjamas. Anyway, I finished part 4 of Wolf Hall now. Still enjoying it, very, I mean, it's my favourite book, apparently, and I don't think I'm ever not going to be enjoying it. It's getting a lot more sort of plotty now, if you can call it that. There's a lot more machinations for Henry VIII to marry Anne Boleyn, and so we're getting more towards that point in time. And that did make me think about, like, if you didn't know any of the history at all, would any of that mean anything to you? Dramatic irony, if you actually didn't know anything and you'd never heard of these people. And it's hard to tell because, being from the UK, this period of history, specifically the dissolution of the monasteries and the marriage of Henry VIII to Anne Boleyn, is so well known and so well covered in our history. It's really hard to imagine not knowing that. But obviously, if you're not from the UK, there's a good chance you wouldn't. So I find it hard to divorce myself from that. I think it still works though. I just think that you would lose that dramatic irony, which is one of the powerful tools that Mantel is using throughout this book, a kind of sense of foreboding. But I feel like you could still tell. She talks a lot about omens and things, and you could still feel those, I believe. Anyway, one of the things that I really wanted to talk about when I was talking about this book is the voice that is used, the perspective. I think that's one of the most important central things to Wolf Hall. One of the things I loved about it, and one of the things I know people struggle with. Have listened to the audiobook of this in the past and not struggled with it. And this is my first time reading the whole thing physically, and so I thought maybe I would come across sentences or times where the fact that throughout the majority of this book, Hilary Mantel refers to Thomas Cromwell as he, and there are mostly men in this book. There are women, but there's so many he's. Would that be confusing? Because that's something that people say a lot. And I literally haven't had one occasion where the fact that it's he is confusing to me. I feel like she's done a really good job of balancing that use of he with the writing, so that it's always obvious who he is. Maybe there are a few times where it could be confusing, but that's never happened to me. It's never happened where I've been like, oh wait, I've had to go back and check which he she's talking about. I think it flows. And I know that most people must feel like that, but there are some people who don't, like a decent minority who don't. And I feel like maybe I often find when I'm talking about books, I'm gonna put this down here, there are people who are much more literal readers and who feel the need to literally parse every part of a sentence and can't just let things flow and find it through context, through to literally understand the first part of the sentence, and they won't even read the second part of the sentence if they haven't got to the first part. It's what my boyfriend's like. And for me, that's just not how I work. Like, I'm much more free-flowing in terms of reading, and you'll get there. I just assume that I will get there. So maybe that's the difference. You need to be a bit more loose and a bit more relaxed. Mantel has talked in interviews about the use of the he and why she decided to do that. The use of he, him, and his happens like 5 times as more common than the word Cromwell, and usually if someone's saying Thomas or Cromwell or Thomas Cromwell, they are a character in the book, and it's in dialogue rather than in the narrative. And it's because of this intimacy. It is a historical fiction book set from the Tudor period. It's written in the present tense. It's to bring this sense of immediacy. She is juxtaposing the dramatic irony of already knowing who's going to lose their head with the immediacy and the tension of it being in the present tense. And she is also not writing in first person, but writing so close to Cromwell that you feel this real sense of intimacy. And there is a lot of idea of like, what is truth and what's he telling you, telling himself, the stories that he's telling himself, in the way that he is viewing other characters, because Cromwell is in every scene and it's always from Cromwell's perspective. We only see the characters the way that he sees the characters, but still without being in first person. We are not him. we are just seeing through his eyes. And I really enjoy that because I feel like she has done such a subtle job of bringing him to life, and I think it wouldn't work well either in first person, because we wouldn't be able to get the subtleties of just seeing things from his perspective without actually being inside his head. There are secrets and things that can be hidden from us that wouldn't be true in first person. That immediacy and that connection is really necessary for the book. Now, I have been reading kind of around it, and apparently the he Cromwell thing becomes a lot more prominent in the second book. I don't remember, I read them all three together, so, but there have definitely been some he Cromwells in here, which was her way of letting people know which she's talking about, he Cromwell. He usually is Cromwell. If the sentence started, for example, with Henry, and then Henry went here, comma, he did this, that's probably still Henry, but if it's a new sentence, it's probably Cromwell. But I think it's very obvious from context, I really do, and I don't think it's something to struggle with. I think it's something to enjoy. Because, as I said, it brings to life this character so thoroughly, and the way that a lot of this is about memory and about the building of mythology, because it's historical fiction. It's about what we remember from the history we have learned, what has lasted through the years, what has been altered by things like Shakespeare and the Catholic Church and the way that they write history, lost or changed or missed out on. And then also it is about mythologizing, because this is such a big part of England's self-mythologizing, looking into that more deeply. Henry VIII is probably one of the most mythologized historical figures. He's such a striking image, more than he is a human. And I think that she is looking at the ways that history is created through memory. I think I'm going to talk about memory again a bit later, but there's definitely a powerful aspect of that in this, and I love it. When I was talking about prophecy and future telling in this book, there is a lot of astrology that I forgot to mention. There are talks of natal charts and when Elizabeth is born, what position will the stars be in. And Thomas Cromwell doesn't know when he was born. His parents didn't keep a note of it. He doesn't know his real birthday. And so he says, I have no natal chart. I have no fate. Which of course he does have a fate because he's a historical person. So we know his fate. But he is also a self-made man. Probably really dark. It's not actually nighttime. It's just raining. I don't know if you can hear that with this on, but it's raining quite heavily at the moment. So I have now 80% of the way through Wolf Hall. There is a lot in this book. There is so much it goes into. There's a lot of history covered, and it's interesting because we're always where Cromwell is, so we only see things from Cromwell's perspective. We never see anything he doesn't see, which means that a lot of the famous parts of the history are off the page and they are reported to Cromwell rather than being directly experienced for us. It really is taking this story about characters much more famous than Cromwell, Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, Catherine of Aragon, even Thomas More, re-establishing Cromwell as, instead of being a sort of minor villain, to being central. I said earlier I wanted to talk about future and the way that Mantel uses the idea of dramatic irony. And one of the key parts of that comes to fruition in part 5 of this, 1, 2, 3, 4, part 5, is the Maid of Bath. I think that's her name. I'm really bad at remembering character names. She is this girl who has been telling
the future, and she says that if Henry marries Anne Boleyn, he won't be king for 7 months. And she sees Mary on the throne, she sees Lady Exeter on the throne. And so we are looking at future telling and what might happen. And because it's told in present tense, it really gives us this sense of what is happening right now at this second. Cranmer has invited the prophetess Elizabeth Barton to a meeting at his house in Kent. She has seen a vision of Mary, the former princess, as queen. Yes. Of Gertrude, Lady Exeter, as queen. Yes. He says gently, both cannot be true. The maid says, I only report what I see. And because in this part, Princess Elizabeth is born to Anne Boleyn, and Anne is pregnant again, and we have this sort of rejoicing and what position she will be in, who will be safe, who will be queen. Cromwell is talking about building a prince for himself with the son of Henry VIII, the prince that he can guide to build England the way that he wants. And if you know about your Tudor history, then you know that that's not what's going to happen. And so she's using this idea of fortune telling and of the future to talk to the reader, directly to the reader, as we are in the future. And to us, this is long since past. Despite the fact that you feel the urgency of the present tense writing, that is construction. She's bringing you to the idea of the construction of this by looking at the future. And I really enjoy that. Well, that's one of the things I love about Mantel in general. Her book, A Place of Greater Safety, that is set during the French Revolution, similarly does a lot of foreshadowing, allows you to look at human folly and to consider what people could possibly have known.
Welcome to the very lackluster ending of this vlog, but I'm not very well, so I'm coming to you from my living room floor, and I don't have my microphone on. I'm just not very well, so I finished Wolf Hall a few days ago, and because I've not been well, I've not felt up to talking to you about it, but apologies. I sound much worse than I feel. I felt really rough the first 2 days of this week, but now we're good, we are ready to talk to you. Thomas More is dead and Anne Boleyn is in trouble. That really made me like obsessed with this series. So I should probably say that Bring Up the Bodies is my favourite book. Or maybe that's a cop-out because I'm like, I did really enjoy this, but I didn't necessarily love it as much as I thought I was going to. Like, the writing, still stunning, impeccable. The atmosphere, the characters, all really, really great. I would say a lot of procedure and slightly slower than I remember it being. But I don't know if that's because I was like trying to read for this vlog, I was trying to get it read. And so I rushed through it, which made it feel like more of a slog than it has done in the past. It might just be my mode of reading rather than the book itself. But I definitely still think it's excellent. Fucking hell, mate. One of my favourite things, one of the things I always talk about loving in this book, and again, something that I think comes up more in Bring Up the Bodies and The Mirror and the Light, as the bodies pile up, so too do more ghosts appear. But in this book, Cromwell loses people. He loses Thomas Wolsey, but he also loses people in his personal life. And the ghosts of those people often haunt him. And the way that Mantel writes grief early on in this book is so touching and so moving. It's excellent. It's one of the more emotional parts of this book is the elements of grief that are explored, and I really, really enjoy it. But one of the reasons that I love the ghosts that haunt Cromwell is because Cromwell is often portrayed in history as a amoral character, a character with a lot of drive and a lot of violence, and without a sort of soft centre. But in this book, a lot of the time, the ghosts feel like his conscience, and there's a lot of times where he's like questioning himself, and he does so through talking to ghosts and thinking things through ghosts. And ghosts are also used to show the passage of time. On top of that, this is historical fiction, so everyone that Mantel is writing about is kind of a ghost. It's kind of a play of ghosts, and so there's a lot in this book metatextually about like history and the way that history is told. And I think that she's using ghosts to talk about that. The way that the past haunts the people in this book, like the fact that Henry throughout all of this book is kind of haunted by the ghost of his brother Arthur, who died, who was the prince who was supposed to become king, where Henry was supposed to go into the church, and who was the person who was supposed to marry Catherine of Aragon. And Henry feels like he can't have a boy, an heir from Catherine of Aragon because of what happened before. Cromwell is in lots of ways a very busy character, a character with a house full of people, but at the same time he is quite a lonely character, and being that haunting of his past, both his like original past, as I was talking about earlier when I was talking about class, like his status as the son of a blacksmith and the abuse he faced in his childhood, and the way that those things still haunt him and kind of prevent him from gaining power in certain ways, or cause people to have a certain idea about him. And those are kind of the parallels between himself and Henry, that there are always these massive figures from his past who are stuck around with him. And I think that Mantel builds atmosphere really well with this idea of ghosts, and she kind of ties this in with the idea of kind of folklore and a folkloric English past where the world was run by where England was like full of giants, and then the sailors from Troy founded England, and there's a lot about like serpents and Melusina and kind of mythical creatures, and there's a lot more like Catholicism, which England was a Catholic country at this time. Catholicism is a lot more mystical than Protestantism, and so there is that butting up of the mystical and the religious, and I think ghosts are part of that too, this kind of liminality, this veil. I think she does a really good job of writing that, and it's one of the things that I love about this book. I love when ghosts are used like this. It's one of my favourite literary devices, is a ghost. Probably because I love Hamlet. That might be where it comes from. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Have you read Wolf Hall? Did you enjoy it? I know it's kind of a divisive book. Like, a lot of people think it's a masterpiece, and then a lot of people think it's really, really boring. But I think it's a lot of fun. And I think that that's often underestimated about it as well. But I hope you have enjoyed this video. I'm sorry the ending isn't as well planned as I thought it would be. This cold has really knocked me out for the past week, but I hope you've enjoyed the video anyway. If you are new here and you made it to the end, well done, gold star. My name is Roisin. I put out new videos mostly every week. Sometimes they're a bit more in-depth like this one, sometimes they're a bit lighter, so I'd love it if you subscribed. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.